I'm Tom Martin, and welcome to another episode of A San Francisco Conservative, the new podcast series featuring yours truly, Tom Martin. I'm a lifelong journalist. I've produced for ABC News, CBS News, and CNN. I love meeting interesting people. I love stimulating conversations and great books. And we have all of that in the form of my co-host for this series, David Parker, who always joins us from San Francisco. Welcome, David. How are you?
I'm fine. I like being in San Francisco.
Great. I can't wait to get back. It's been a few years for me, but just so our audience is fresh in their minds, David is the author of two excellent books, Income and Wealth and A San Francisco Conservative, the title of which inspired the title of our podcast series here. And David has a book of essays coming out any day now, so be sure to look for all three of those books. And David, one year that's very special to me. Again, as you know, I spent a lot of time with Charles Kuralt at CBS News, and he sort of embodied the spirit of America. I was looking for the different regional stories and whatnot. And so President's Day is a great holiday. And I love the way that your books really bring, back to life some of the important lessons from our founding fathers of America that it's so easy for us to forget. It's so easy for us to stray, for example, from the intention of the Constitution, such a beautifully designed document. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to hear you say, here are some things that the founding fathers knew that maybe we're losing sight of. So take it away, David.
All right. I would have put two or three words, but all my writings is the fathers got it right. And at the beginning of the Revolutionary War, Thomas Jefferson announced, we're going to be fighting for something that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. A nation without a king or a queen. A nation where everyone has the vote, regardless of wealth, regardless of social status. If Jefferson were living today, it would mean men and women, but that he said men, but that's the only difference. And if you're afraid of that, meaning individual citizens are responsible for their lives, government will be so small you won't see it. And in fact, when the British came in 1812 with that war, and they came to burn down Washington, D.C., they couldn't find any buildings. There were almost no government buildings. That's how small government was. They grabbed a few documents and ran. That proves the point. And in 1933, we reversed the whole thing. We became a progressive nation as opposed to a conservative nation. And he says, if you're afraid of that no government to help you out, you're on your own, and every man has the vote, you're afraid of democracy. And if you're afraid of all that, leave right now, because we're going to take on the British, the largest military in Europe. We don't even have a military, and we're going to take them on. That's how tough we are. And thousands of people fled. That's the birth of Canada. You could almost say that's who Canadians are Americans who fled during the Revolution. You guys are out of your nuts. You're going to be cleaned out. All the guys who signed the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock, whose name is as big as the whole independence, the whole document. All those guys, if America lost the war, that was their death sentence. They were going to be captured, hung as traitors. That's how big of that. That's not even taught in the public schools correctly, the way I'm saying it. We're talking about current events. We're not talking about what the country is based on, what our core curriculum in the public schools should be. The history and culture of British and American democracy, to unite the nation, so we all have that in common. It doesn't take all day long to teach that. You can teach everything else under the sun too, but we're not teaching that basic thing. And President's Day is a good day to remind the nation they should go back to that. We've dropped the ball.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I know you said, again, before we started recording this episode, you were saying you're working on a new essay about education, an aspect of education. You are a lifelong educator, and we're in San Francisco's public schools for 40 plus years, teaching the children there. it's interesting how that debate has come up again about harmony between the races and all of that kind of thing, civil rights, obviously. But I was just wondering what other lessons have we forgotten? Again, I was listening to a historian just earlier today, and he was talking about, we might think every state's representatives in those very early days was all about union and harmony and so on, but there was great animosity and so on. And so can we learn from the leaders from that earlier era about harmony perhaps with other nations, just as they had harmony between the different states?
Harmony had nothing to do with it. The states were almost like individual countries. And to get them to sign to agree to a constitution, we set up a government that gave states enormous rights and government hardly any rights. So to end that kind of, because there was no harmony. Every state is on your own. And if you don't like what your state is doing, move to another state. So interstate commerce was one of the big deals. No state could stop another state from selling or preventing products from being sold. Interstate commerce, but that's the only harmony that they created. They had to get the South to sign, and the South says, our states' right allow us to have slaves, and the Constitution is kind of saying, well, we're a constitutional democracy. We have laws. The one law is you can't enslave people. That's not in the Constitution, but that's what it means to have a constitutional monarchy. You can't take the law in your own hand. You can't kill people. You can't enslave people. A few basic things. Our Constitution is one page. It's just a set of rules. Don't drive faster than 65 miles per hour. That's all it's saying. The government can do eight different things. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Just a few things. They can have a post office. They can run a navy. Secure patents.
Yeah. I want to pick up on that in more detail in just a minute. But I just wanted to throw in, if any of you are joining us midstream here, whether it's on audio, perhaps on the YouTube channel, San Francisco Conservative, the podcast, or video or audio. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is a San Francisco Conservative, the podcast. We're talking about lessons from our founding fathers with reference to President's Day. So, David, we shined the spotlight on that earlier era, some of the things that so many of us have forgotten or maybe never learned. But let's shine the spotlight on what's happening today. What are some signs that perhaps our representatives have strayed from the intention of that beautiful one-page document, the Constitution?
But you just said it. 1933, that's what progressivism means. We're progressing from the Constitution. We're progressing from a literal interpretation of the Constitution, one page. We're progressing from the 10 Commandments, 10 sentences. Because every case is different. Everybody's different. We know nothing about past history. We have nothing to work from. We have to give everyone their day in court. We need to have 500 million courts going simultaneously all day long and night, because everybody has something to say. And huge mistake. And if people have problems, government should bail them out. Everybody should have a universal basic income. And a right like the UN Charter of Rights, or America doesn't have rights. We have laws. We have civil laws. But there's no rights exist in nature. A right to anything means that somebody has to give it to you.
Good point. I want to, I don't know, shift the conversation a little bit, perhaps, but I have a couple of friends. I have one friend who's born in Russia, for example, and so on. And so they take great pride in passing that, U.S. citizenship exam. I know that, speaking of France earlier, a few generations back, my ancestors came from France, and I know that, your heritage is of, so many of us in this country. But again, what does it mean to become a U.S. citizen, and what responsibilities do you think we have as American citizens?
I think it should be acknowledged that most people came here, waited in line, and were so grateful they got in. And if they didn't get in, they just died in a concentration camp or something. And today, people think we don't have to wait in line when we might not get in. We'll just barge, we'll just take our fist and knock the door down and come on in. So that we're not dealing with that. It's called lax law enforcement. And there's three things that are going to destroy the Democratic Party eventually. One of them is that lax law enforcement. We have homeless all over the place. Nobody is dealing with that. But there should be a simple law that you can't lay down and die on the sidewalk. Move to the outskirts of town, or move to a shelter that cities are willing to provide that the homeless won't go into. Make them go into it. No one wants to. We're becoming a weak nation, and our public schools are doing very badly. I'm from California, born and raised here. When I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, we had among the best schools in the nation. And now for the last 40 years, they're ranking very close to the bottom because we don't enforce standards. We want to be inclusive. And the only way to have people who are coming from very low social backgrounds be included is not have standards too high. I taught school my whole life. I know what the standards were when I started. I taught the same classes most of my life. At the end, in half, literally in half. California is teaching at half, and the nation is teaching at half. And Silicon Valley hires 71% of all their employees are foreign born. They won't hire Americans.
Yeah, no, it's very, very concerning. I want to circle back. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, reverse that.
Yeah, no, it's very concerning, no question. I want to circle back. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but again, the presidential race is heating up. Donald Trump has declared. The number of candidates have declared. I think Biden probably any time now. Maybe by the time people are listening to this, he will have. But a hot political issue is what everybody's calling critical race theory. I'm sure you've heard, and read a lot about that. How do you look at that issue? How should we look at that important issue?
It's a little bit like people who are wealthy, not caring what politics, not caring what the Democrats or Republicans are saying, because they're both saying somehow tax the rich, and you can't get the money from the rich. So it's an amoral stance getting very close to being immoral. So if blacks are really going to get behind critical race theory, and many blacks are as against that as anybody else, all that stuff's going to backfire, because the nation is about what the founding fathers did and our continuation of that. Our nation is not about what the cotton pickers did. It's just completely wrong, 100% wrong. I don't mean that to sound like a racist statement. I'm not. I'm a jazz musician. All my guys are from some other culture. I love that world personally. I don't mean to talk like that. Yeah,
you're certainly teaching and living right in, as they say, a melting pot. Many different cultures among your students over the years, obviously.
I've been teaching low-income neighborhood schools my whole life, walking the kids home, cleaning up their bedrooms. So I don't mean to sound like that, but that's going to backfire because it's not true. It's a bunch of nonsense. And they talk about reparations. They should stop talking reparations. They're never going to get it. Stop it. No one's going to pay them.
Yeah. Okay. And just to kind of round out this conversation today, is there a book or two that you would recommend that we read? I mean, if we want to, expose ourselves to that wisdom of that earlier era, the founding fathers of America, any classics that we should know about?
Absolutely. I'll give you one. Everyone should read Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville, 1835. He opens up his book, says, America, you idiots, get rid of slavery. What are you doing? Then he says, because if you do, you're going to become the greatest nation that has ever existed. When you read that book, it makes Americans so proud. He says he's never seen a nation of people so responsible. He went to Kentucky, people sitting in log cabins, they're reading the newspaper. They're discussing international events. If you're in Europe, farmers are not sitting there reading the newspaper discussing international events and freedom and everything else that they were talking about. They're working and they're complaining and they're singing and dancing, but they're not. This is a completely different country. No king or queen, small government, everybody's on their own. Everybody's trying to make money. The world is going to collapse compared to America. You're on the right track, he says. And every high school and college kid should read that book. Make you proud. And he's not denying our problems. Yeah, racism, we got a problem.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah. So in closing, of course, I would like to recommend two books by David Parker, Income and Wealth and a San Francisco Conservative, because you really bring these issues and this history alive in such a current way that really, I look at so many of these issues that we've discussed on this podcast series a little bit differently because of that sense of history. Would you like to say anything about your books as we close?
All my books have two things that make them stand out, I think. One, I give examples from history, and not just American history. I go back to the Greeks and the Romans and say, they talk like us. You would not know, if I didn't tell you who the author was, about the same things at a much higher level. We are particularly at a very low point in human history, the 21st and 20th century, not in science and technology, but in level of conversation, level of discussion, very, very low point. And then I give examples from business because I've been successful in business despite all my writing and everything else I'm doing. And so my examples are not from academia. It makes the book much more interesting. So I encourage everyone to buy my Gospel of Wealth, which is called Income and Wealth, and a San Francisco Conservative, not that conservative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can find these books, purchase both of these books through David's website, davidparkeressays.com. Also, be sure to visit our podcast channel, our YouTube channel, the San Francisco Conservative, the podcast. That's where you'll find it. Press the subscribe button. And you can also, of course, find David's books on Amazon. So thanks again, David. I learned a lot, as I always do. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.